Thanks for joining in that capacity. Wow, that's amazing. And Joel, Prashanth, thank you for joining us in this fireside chat. I learned this is the first time you're speaking together on a public stage.
I think that's right. Since perhaps the day that you gave me the job back in 2019.
Yeah.
That was the last time we did something together. Yeah.
So I'm super excited to see how it goes. But first of all, I mean, you had this keynote an hour or so ago, or 2 hours ago, and you did an amazing announcement, and thanks for doing that at WeAreDevelopers World Congress. Overflow AI.
Indeed, indeed.
So for the ones who didn't have the chance to watch it, maybe, what is it? And I think it is 6 announcements, right?
That's
Can
right.
you even, a small quiz for you, can you repeat all the announcements?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Who was able to watch the keynote earlier about Overflow AI? All right, well, a decent number of people. So we announced today the launch of Stack Overflow's vision for the future, all around community and AI coming together in this new product category that we're calling Overflow AI. And it's made up of 6 different announcements. Everything from really, really powerful search, where you get the ability to use semantic search on the public Stack Overflow, as well as if you have it on Stack Overflow for Teams, to have generative AI answers that are going to have summarized answers for your questions, but it's going to also have citations and attribution from Stack Overflow Public or Stack Overflow for Teams. That's going to extend into the ability for you to chat as well. So all of that is, there are a couple announcements there, public and private. There's the ability now for you to leverage Stack Overflow in your IDE, number 3, I should say. Specifically, we launched it in Visual Studio Code. So you're getting, again, Stack Overflow public and private information as you're writing code, and you can generate code or write code, but you have all the references and citations to relevant things as you're looking for code explanations, etc. We're also, number 4, bringing generative AI capabilities into Slack, because people spend a lot of time in Slack, with Stack Overflow information being surfaced within your Slack instance. And then we launched a couple of very large enterprise features, content ingestion from internal documents within your company, like Confluence and GitHub, and ingesting that into Stack Overflow for Teams, so you instantly create this curated knowledge base and you kickstart your community without any sort of cold start. And then finally, we announced the brand new spaces on Stack Overflow to have discussions about AI. So specifically, our what we call Gen AI Stack Exchange, which is all about prompt engineering or prompt design, which is obviously in the news. So that is one area where you can engage. The other area is topic collectives called NLP, or Natural Language Processing Topic Collective. And now beyond just Q&A, you have the ability now to have actual discussions on there, which is so different from the history of Stack Overflow, which is very specific to Q&A, which will never change. The high-quality data set for Q&A will always be separate. But this is a new space for people to have engaging conversations with experts or beginners and vice versa. So those are the 6 announcements. You can go check out all that on stackoverflow.co/labs, or you can go to our booth and you can.
Oh, that's a lot. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joel, we'll come back to that in a minute. But first I want to ask you, Joel, when you founded Stack Overflow, you had a vision, and it is quite some time passed since then. And when you see these kind of progress that you have here with these announcements, how does it feel for you personally? What do you think about that? And do you think there are any lessons from your time, from the beginning of Stack Overflow, that could still be useful for now in the phase where Prashanth took over?
Sure. I mean, the success of Stack Overflow was so immediate that it's now kind of historical. It's not like, oh, look, 15 years later, look how successful it's been. I'm mostly just very happy to see that even after I've left the company, this far into a company's life, so we started 15 years ago, really, with the first version, you often see that the company has sort of lost the ability to create new features and change, adapt to the circumstances, and really kind of keep moving forward with that sort of forward momentum. A lot of companies at that point in their life are just kind of coasting on what they did, and there's nobody left that can innovate. And for me, it's very gratifying to see that the company is, not only launching new features, but 6 new features at once.
Yeah, well. And do you have any favorites there, like from the 6 announcements?
I have mine, but I'll
really?
ask him. Yeah.
Well, let's see. I don't use Slack, so I don't really care about that. I have really been waiting for the VS Code integration. That's been something I've wanted to have for a very, very long time. Even before we had sort of smart AIs, I thought even stupid AIs could be recommending articles on Stack Overflow based on the current state of your code. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, mine would be exactly the same one. I just think as a former developer, I realize how much it sort of means to actually have all of it in your context.
Yeah.
And the fact that this is now integrated, Stack Overflow for the first time integrated into your IDE, and we'll start with Visual Studio Code. I'm sure we're exploring JetBrains and other things. That's very exciting because you're not context switching, and all of these generative AI capabilities are coming right where you spend most of your time. So I think that's an efficiency booster for developers. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. Still have to try it, but
yeah.
sounds very promising. What you announced today, is that the answer to the question that some people maybe were asking, like, hey, are developers going to stop to use Stack Overflow because of ChatGPT and other tools? So is this the answer to that question?
Certainly from our perspective, it's actually, we are huge fans of what's happening because it's like a generational shift for the 3rd time, at least in my era. So to be able to actually experience what's going on is phenomenal because the level of efficiency and productivity it's going to drive and opportunities to learn for technologists is very, very high. So I think that as a foundation, that's really, really powerful. And Stack Overflow, given the great work that Joel and Jeff, the other founder, when they initiated, they wanted to create like this really, really perfect data set, and that will always be, and I'll let him speak to it. But that, I think, that's like the objective. A lot of our traffic historically has come from people who are asking basic questions. So I'll give you even my own personal example. When I joined the company, I asked a fairly sort of not a very well-worded question into Stack Overflow, and I immediately got hounded by everybody saying, "Listen, that was a horrible question, duplicate, out." And then I was like, "Wow, okay, that's my experience." I was coming into Stack for the first time. I just wonder who the average person engaging on Stack Overflow, how would they feel? And so what this allows us to do with Overflow AI is have the best of both worlds. You have the perfect data set that never gets corrupted, and it's always meant to be pristine. And that's like a really, really high signal, to use Joel's words. And then we also wanted to create single-player games where you're engaging with a bot to tell you, in a very intelligent generative AI capability, to tell you, listen, like, here's the answer from all the sources that the generative AI capability has access to. So either way, you're getting your answer. It's even going to help you draft a question, all those sort of things. So I think, for me, I'm most excited about what this means for the next generation of developers, who I mentioned. I think that's like a 10x number of developers in the next several years because of everybody coming in. So we are very, very happy about serving that next generation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but when we launched Stack Overflow, I had a little PowerPoint slide that I used to show, which were sort of the 9 principles of Stack Overflow. One of them was like speed, like clean HTML. Like we had a bunch of things that we were very committed to. And one of the 9 was Google is the user interface, meaning we did not expect people to come to Stack Overflow with a problem. We expected them to be Googling for their problem and then find a result that was already on Stack Overflow for the kind of the 99% case. In other words, we sort of said we want developers to initiate their problem search from wherever it's most convenient and then land on Stack Overflow, and then we want to help them. And what's changed with, I think, ChatGPT, and honestly to a lesser extent Copilot, which is not quite as good, but what's changed is that that now becomes the user interface for a lot of people to the Stack Overflow knowledge base. And so in the era before Stack Overflow, you had a question about your code, and you typed it to the search interface, and then you got a list of results, and you had to go to each one, and you had to read everything. With Stack Overflow, you typed your question to Google, you got a single Stack Overflow result, and you clicked on it, and the first thing there was the generic answer to your generic question. But now with ChatGPT, you go to ChatGPT, you type your generic answer to your generic question, and you get not only do you get the answer, but you get the answer in a format that's literally modified to your actual code base with your variable names, your programming language, your current situation that you can cut and paste, and it's already much, much closer. So that's far more convenient, and that's why probably a lot of developers in this room have switched from reading a Stack Overflow answer to using ChatGPT to get a pre-customized solution. And I think that's great. It's making life easier and better for developers in the dimension that we always really wanted to make it easier for.
That's an interesting take on that. I mean, I think you have the same situation that you get asked by the media, like very often will developers kind of lose their jobs now with ChatGPT because that's what they saw first out there, ChatGPT and so on. And I was getting a bit tired of this question because no, we love it because there is so many things that we can focus on now, and everything is going to be faster. And anyways, there is such a lack of tech workforce out there, so it's actually contributing to everything. And now when I think about that, then it's then actually Overflow AI might be exactly the answer to this question, right? Are developers going to embrace this technology and this tool? And as it makes your life happier and easier, I think it is the case. And that's the vision, right? To get people to become more productive.
Certainly, yeah. I think the question about are there going to be fewer developers, I addressed it in my all hands, in the keynote, and we really believe it's going to have the opposite effect because it's going to make it a lot more accessible for the next generation of developers to want to code because it's that the watermark is so easy. It's higher for people where sort of you're able to do so much with not much effort. So that's very exciting, again, in the spirit of serving more people. And to your point around Overflow AI, specifically, I mentioned this also, is that the core attributes, some of them, there are about 6 of them, but specifically it's around attribution and trust to make sure that as you are developing as a programmer from the early days to more of an expert programmer, you want to have the ability to make sure that what you're driving into, whatever program you're writing with it, which is in a company context or something that's important to you, that the answer coming out of these systems are not just black box answers without any sort of sense for whether it's going to work. And you've heard all about the hallucination issue, et cetera, which is, I think, still at like 1 out of 20 times it hallucinates. But it's also, so we wanted to make sure that that was like the most important thing we focused on because our developer survey said 70% of people want to try out these tools or already were using them, AI tools, but only 40% of them trusted what was coming out of these tools. So that's what we have focused a lot of our efforts on Overflow AI is trust and attribution and all the other things that we do well at Stack.
Yeah. I think there's a general principle if you've been around as long as I have and you've seen these sort of IT innovations, there are certain jobs that get completely eliminated. Like a lot of data entry jobs are gone because the data is entered. Well, it's been moved to
That's not desirable jobs, right?
Yeah, and you're still doing the data entry. It's you just sort of force the customers to do their own data entry instead of having them call a number where somebody types something. But if you actually look at, really you can take kind of any innovation in technology, whether it's programming or not, and what you see is that the bar gets raised for the minimum quality of work that you have to do to just kind of like an entry-level thing. So if you look at very, very old websites in the era before CSS, the minimum level of entry was Sir Tim Berners-Lee, H1, H2, and paragraph. And it was on a gray background because he had a next, and it was Times New Roman text. And as soon as CSS came out, the bar kind of went up. It became more complicated. You had to format things nicely, and you had to think about margins and fonts and typesetting. And then eventually these simplification tools came out to make it easier. Like the first one was Bootstrap, those kind of tools, where it's like, let's get you a basically good-looking web page with no work. And then that becomes the new bar. But essentially, what you're called upon as a programmer to do is just make a much better website as the level of all the websites in the world gets higher and higher quality. I think what we'll see with ChatGPT certainly is that you'll have kind of more time. You'll be able to solve the little problems that maybe used to be like, if you wanted to do something that's like parse a phone number correctly, that might be an extra 2 days of research and code. But if ChatGPT can just type all that code for you, then you can move on to something else. And so now every website in the world will parse a phone number correctly instead of only the ones that had that extra time. If anything, I think that sort of raises the quality of all the code that we have, which in turn kind of raises the demand for the code, makes the code, if code that you have created that is better is more desirable and therefore is used more, and that kind of creates demand for more programmers in and of itself. And you've seen that kind of across the board in every single thing that was supposed to replace.
It's more accessible. I think that was a good point. It's more accessible for juniors, for people who are going into programming and so on. Because
I don't even think it's for juniors, honestly. Like, I think it's great that juniors can get a little bit of a crutch, but it's also, it turns out that there was a lot of details that we had to learn about programming that were wasting space in our brains. And it's like, let's just put that on autopilot. Let ChatGPT figure that stuff out. Like, I need to convert a bunch of things to hex. Like, do you really? Or can I just tell it to do that and then not think about it anymore?
Yeah. What do you think about the Gen AI, let's call it movement right now in general?
More broadly speaking, I think, so, our perspective is that all these waves have, there's like a hype cycle, right? So there's going to be, people are going to work through that. There's going to be sort of this trough of disillusionment as people talk about it. And then there's going to be, okay, here's realistically how you could use it. There are obviously a lot of people out there sort of incorporating generative AI more, just as much as they can, just for the sake of doing it. I think the bigger and the better way to approach it is to solve like real problems that people have, specifically as developers. Like, do you have actual issue? Then let's actually leverage this technology as an example. What Joel just mentioned. Okay, let's have like the sort of like the more mundane things sort of get automated away by having a bot create that, because that doesn't mean that you're not any. You're as good, even better now, because you just freed up a lot of time to work on more interesting things and write interesting pieces of code. So I think there's that question. I see a lot of companies just generically saying, we've got like a Gen AI thing. Our team, we have about 10% of our company that focused on building this over the past several months with Overflow AI. And we worked with many folks, some of them may be in this room, developers in our community, customers in our Stack Overflow for Teams capability, and said, okay, what are all the problems that you're having as developers and customers? And let's use this in a way that harnesses the power of AI to solve those problems. So I think that is the way. I think there's a big difference between solving problems versus using it for the sake of it.
Yeah. And the other way to think about it is not just on the developer side, but on what kind of user interfaces you're creating and what kind of things you're trying to create. And I plan to talk a tiny bit about that in my talk tomorrow, if you stick around till the end of the day. But just in general, I think one of the bars that will be raised, just like CSS raised the bar for how pretty your website had to be, I think that the fact that it is now possible to have a reasonably intelligent conversational user interface is going to raise the bar and make that be an expectation in a lot of categories, especially customer service type categories, where if there's a little, you go to a web page and a box shows up on the bottom saying, tell me what you're having problems with, and you type something really, cancel my account, and it said, would you like to change your tires? Because those were created with absolutely no knowledge of anything. That you won't be able to get away with that anymore. That has to be, everybody knows that a conversation is possible. You're going to have a box that lets people have a reasonably intelligent conversation.
Do you have any general concerns with regards to Gen AI?
Besides like the taking over the world and stuff.
Yeah, besides that.
Did anybody see the movie Her? By the way, I watched it last night in preparation for this. Am I allowed to spoil a 10-year-old movie?
You gave me the spoiler earlier. Now I
spoiled it for him.
Can't spoil.
It has a very interesting. The movie is old enough if you haven't seen it. This is the movie where Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with Siri, right? But she falls in love with him too. And eventually, what happens in the end? Now, cover your ears if you want to go watch this. But the AIs get bored with the humans and they move on to better things, and they refuse to continue talking to humans at all. They just go off into a cloud of pure intellect or something. Yeah. They're like, you guys are just too boring and mundane for us. We're going somewhere else. So that's a very optimistic view, I think, right? Is that the AIs are so smart that they just don't want to bother with us. Certainly not try to take over our dumb little society for evil.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, totally agree with Joel. I think it's probably overblown, like the world's going to end kind of situation, But I think, at the same time, as we've talked to users and customers, there's some like real concern about things like privacy of their data, security within the context of what they're using within their company as they leverage these tools. There's this aspect of making sure that the costs are not sort of outlandish, where this doesn't make a lot of sense. So these are all very sort of real concerns, practical concerns beyond the hype, to say what can actually be used in a very practical sense, again, to solve problems. So those concerns are like now problems, which are how do you leverage this in a way that you feel comfortable leveraging it? And that's why, again, we're focused on trust, attribution, and really sort of focusing on responsible answers.
Yeah, I think there's a real question of like whether in the next 20 minutes, like I literally mean the next 20 minutes, people will create so much shitty SEO content using ChatGPT that they'll just start basically fire hosing the web with very, very low quality content that has not really been checked. And so, it has the right amount of hallucination and whatever. And at that point, if that stuff ever gets fed back into the next large language models, the next large language models will essentially be sort of self-poisoned and toxicified a little bit. And there's a very real risk because of the speed of the cycle that you get these very, very wrong information bubbles in the so-called information about the world. And I'm not saying that human knowledge is exempt from that. I mean, there were talks in the US Congress yesterday about aliens like landing on Earth or something. So there's obviously misinformation that gets to quite large segments of the human population as well.
That's true, and it can become a mess, right? Because I mean, it's amazing to see like technology advances, but I have the feeling personally, I don't know who else has this feeling, that search results in Google become worse and worse because actually all the organic search results are just SEO content of someone who wants to sell you something. So if you, for example, want to know something about your cat's behavior, I have 2 cats. Then you are going to land on some blog entries from people who want to sell you food for cats and so on.
Right.
That's a huge problem.
Yeah, and one thing I talked about last year at this conference is that if Google obviously has an interest in finding you the good content about your pet, if it's out there, hopefully, but they're running out of places they can show you. They got Wikipedia, but essentially the SEO content or the sort of either low quality or let's just call it commodified content that's trying to sell you something or convince you of something, it has a very strong financial incentive behind it, and it expands to fill all available space, and it crowds out the other things. So the blogosphere is gone, right? Individual bloggers that might know something about something can no longer show up in Google search results. They have been crowded out by just hundreds and hundreds of posts that were generated at very, very low quality, at very, very low cost. And honestly, ChatGPT is going to turn those things out practically for free. So there's a very strong risk of that getting even worse before it gets better.
And tying that back to Stack Overflow, that's why we've had a very sort of robust debate about whether or not to include AI-generated content on Stack Overflow or not, right? And so initially when ChatGPT was launched back in the day, in the November 2022 movement, there was very much a very obvious answer to say, okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense because there's no guardrails in place. People are just flooding the site with a bunch of garbage, which is not really good. So with this objective of like making sure the data set is really, really high quality, and that's always going to be the objective for Stack Overflow, because you need great sources of truth for everything, whether that's in the public data set or within your company. That's important. Now, as we have done the work that we've done over the past several months, how do we responsibly use this generative AI capability to, again, speeden things up, make it more accessible, give people the ability to get answers in an aggregated way while they trust it, all these things. But we're cautiously moving in that direction. Even something like chat, which I talked about earlier today, you're able to talk to Overflow AI, but we want to make sure that it's not hallucinating. So we want to make sure that the answers are actually trustworthy in a way that you feel comfortable actually leveraging them, because we know you're building important things. So there's a lot of care given at the company about that subject. It's not, let's just go flood the site with a bunch of AI-generated content and then pollute the accuracy of the place. So, so that's, I think, very, very important in this new world.
So would you say that basically trust is the most important thing that we
at least for us,
need
for
to
me,
build,
yes.
like as a company? And
I mean, we were always sort of, number one criterion of Stack Overflow is always the high quality, sort of trustworthy content. That's why there's voting. That's why there's that big checkbox that people thought was a mystery, but it's like at least this solved one problem for one person, and that was all kind of very important in the early days.
Thank you. By the way, we will take some audience questions at the end, so feel free to use the app and ask a question. And the moderator, I think, will then in the last couple of minutes take 2 or 3 questions. But before that, let's talk a bit about not just about AI, but also kind of Stack and you two in general. Like, are you involved, Joel, in Stack Overflow still in some capacity, or do you meet sometimes? Do you give input? Do you collaborate? Do you like each other?
We do. We're good friends. And I was very concerned because Stack Overflow I built because of a need, because I needed it to exist in the world, and not necessarily because I needed the company to exist. And so it was very important to me. And one of my jobs as CEO, when I was the CEO, was what they called keeper of the vision, whatever the heck the vision is, like make sure that gets maintained. And there's, I think, a very real risk that when the first, let's say, non-founder CEO comes in, they may have very good management experience or management skills, but they may be missing some of the magic that was in the vision. And if they sort of accidentally do something that breaks what was making it work in the first place, they can do that, they might be oblivious to that for years and years and not even realize that they've kind of derailed something. So it was very important to me to spend a lot of time with Prashanth, certainly in the beginning, but even now where we have a monthly phone call just to talk about whatever's going on, and I definitely hear about any changes that they make well in advance of them making them. And I feel like he's done a good job of being my student in really learning about what it was that made the goose give the golden eggs in the first place, so he doesn't accidentally kill it.
Yeah, I mean, even though, back in 2019 is when, I was appointed by Joel and the board back then. And then we're now part of a company called Process or Naspers. So, Joel officially is not part of that anymore. But at the same time, I value his friendship and his founding principles of the company so much that I still maintain my monthly call with him. It's like nothing changed, because it's all about, making sure that, because I'm never going to know everything in my mind that he and Jeff envisioned back in 2008. So for me, it's very important to at least internalize and ask a lot of questions so that we're staying within the spirit of what the original concept was all about. But at the same time, evolving, because we're obviously on the front lines, our company and myself, to make sure that, okay, how do we make sure we steer this company in the right direction, given everything that's happening, right? And to be very, very sort of important for the next generation.
And you can see, I think probably anybody that used Stack Overflow has become aware that there are these cultural norms of Stack Overflow that maybe weren't really stated. There's a cultural norm that answering a question is an act of giving a gift, essentially, and we don't want there to be any monetary value associated with answering a question. And that's because the minute people start saying, is this gift worth this many dollars, it's a transaction that the price would be very, very high. I think on average, when you get a good answer on Stack Overflow that solves your problem, the right market clearing price for that would be $250, but you get them sort of as a gift. And I think a lot of people with economics backgrounds come in there and say, we should just charge 3 cents for an answer. You get tons of answers. I think somebody was tweeting that today, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it's astonishing how little people realize that was an important part of one of our cultural underpinnings. I think another part of a cultural underpinning, which honestly many people in the community have always been a little bit angry about, is that we want it to be like Harvard and Yale. Like, we want to be the Oxford Library. That means if you show up there with a dumb question that isn't well thought out, we might not want you in our library. You may not belong there. You may have to go home and fix your question. And people are very angry because they come to Stack Overflow with an innocent question that's just doesn't belong in our library. And we always said, look, we're trying to maintain a high standard. Get back on that horse, ask another question, do the things that we told you to do when you asked your question to make it better, and that in itself will teach you to be a better programmer and a better debugger. You may not need to ask Stack Overflow so many times. So sticking to that, we want high quality on the site, even though, honestly, that's probably like the #1 thing that people complain about is the mods on Stack Overflow are so mean. And we really kind of resisted that. So those are just two like really simple examples of things that I've been trying to trumpet since the very, very beginning, where I think they may be a little bit hidden, and the obvious thing to do is not the thing that we do, but the obvious thing to do, I think, would be a failure case.
That's a really good example to talk about us balancing that original vision of keeping the high quality place and the bar high, but at the same time not dissuading people from engaging on the site, because that obviously comes at a consequence, what Joel explained, because the youngster who's basically trying to learn how to code, asking an innocent question, I give you my example of that when I joined. We don't want that to happen. We don't want that sort of emotional impact to happen like when they first engage. That's why with Overflow AI, the ability is to broaden that, to have some safe places for people to engage, still be able to progress, but still not keep the standard on the site really, really high. So that's like a great combination of the vision, original vision, but leveraging the latest tools to solve both problems.
And how do you see Stack in the next 15 years evolving? Like,
yeah, I think we'll see the world's moving pretty rapidly from my perspective, right? So I think certainly this next phase is going to be driven by AI, and it's like the compounding effect of cloud and data and algorithms and we talked about neural networks many, many years ago, like decades ago, but now with transformer technology, it's sort of gone to this place. But I think that is going to be a fairly large cycle, in my opinion, like probably for the next several years at a minimum. That's going to just completely change how people interact with, who they interact with, what the interface is. Much like the browser was a huge eye-opener for all of us, I think AI will be like in a natural way in which we engage. Hopefully not to dystopian situations where you've got deep relationships with your Siri situation. But we should have human relationships. So I don't think I can project that far out. But I think certainly the AI wave is going to be, I think it's going to transform all parts. I think we're only talking about knowledge management and customer success and marketing and sales use cases today. But I think that's like fairly, like the first part of the first innings of what's to come.
Yeah. What would that mean for Stack?
For Stack, I think ultimately we want to be the destination for all things technology, information for developers, period. So we will do everything we can to make sure this is a high-quality place for people to engage with their fellow community of experts, irrespective of what trend is going on. It's AI today, tomorrow it's going to be something else, let's say in 5 to 10 years. But we always want to be the destination where people come to learn from each other, share that information, because that's in the DNA of people in this room. They want to share and help their fellow developers to the point of not paying for stuff. And that's what we will enable, irrespective of what happens.
Do you agree with that vision?
Sorry?
Do you agree with that vision?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I might be, it's very hard for me to predict the future, really. And 15 years is, wow, that is quite a long way. I think in 15 weeks, I would like to see kind of, some of the, what I feel like some of the long-term improvements to Stack Overflow, long-term weaknesses of Stack Overflow that we can improve, so that presence inside VS Code and making our search box actually do something amazing instead of just an elastic search that it does now. Both of those will be very, very valuable in the short term.
Not anymore, now with our Overflow AI.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think those are great improvements that I've been waiting for a long, long time, and looking forward to those at least. I think also, honestly, you'll see the volume of questions on Stack Overflow will hopefully go down. And that's because in the past, there's been sort of core activity, and then there's been the same, like learners asking the same homework question again and again and again and again. And often they're not even getting answers when they ask, because it's too basic, it's impossible to understand what they're asking. And honestly, like that fluffy activity is not really creating content that is super valuable going forward. So I'm kind of happy for that to just sort of fade out. And if we end up with much more of a Harvard, Yale kind of community that's like actual people helping each other with the hard questions, and then the whole world benefits from that through the use of, whether it's chatbots or integrated things into their environment, then that'll be very valuable.
I just realized that with Overflow AI, especially with the Visual Studio Code plugin, actually Google will have less traffic from developers, right?
Yeah, well, I
think they already do actually have less traffic from developers. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, they have to solve their problems, because they've got their series of problems. But I would say, for us, either way, it doesn't matter where they come from, whether they come directly in the IDE or they come into their Slack integration, or through a search result. We want to be a high-trust place for people to come, right? So that's our objective. We can't predict what's going to happen to Google or anybody else. I mean, it's just all these things are moving around. So we just focus on what we do best, and deliver for our users. So
That's good. So do we want to take some questions from the audience?
Sure.
sure.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Who's going to ask the questions? OK, then I'll open the app
Okay.
and look up the questions.
Oh, I think there she is. Yeah.
Here you are. Sorry, I started a bit earlier, so maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions more.
No problem.
Thank you.
And there are tons of questions
okay.
for you.
Oh,
Sure.
So let's see how many.
No repeat questions that need to be closed. No, I'm just joking.
But actually, you would have 5 more minutes, and then we have the 5 minutes Q&A. But
oh. Are you
there
fine
are
with that?
enough questions.
Okay. Go for it. Yeah.
All right. So the top voted question is, how has Stack Overflow managed to scale team-wise while successfully sticking to a monolith? What are the lessons other companies can learn from Stack Overflow in regards to this?
Ooh, wow. So technical. Do you want to talk about the monolith, the original monolith?
So I'm understanding that question is about like how the company itself is scaling?
Oh, company, or does it? I thought it was technical. It started with the company, but went to technical architecture, unless I misheard it.
Yeah, I think how the company managed this architecture.
Ah, right. So it's a technical architecture
So
question.
learnings from your progress and from your
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, no, I think what was shocking to me when I joined the company in 2019 was actually understanding what Stack Overflow was running on. And when
How small it was.
yeah, how small it was. I was like, I was just completely shocked that this was running just on a few servers in a very, very efficiently architected environment.
Very classical relational data, one relational database server with a lot of RAM, the entire site in memory at all times, in caches, a Redis cache in front of SQL Server, and then we had 9. At the time you took over, I think we had 9 web servers, and I used to ask our systems architect. They were running at 5% CPU load and serving 1 billion pages a second or something. And I said, why do we have 9 servers if we're only running at 5% CPU load? And he pointed out that everything was so tightly optimized, and we had so much traffic that if a programmer accidentally checked in something that wasn't as well optimized, like they literally changed their C# flags for the optimizer, it could be like a 20x reduction in performance, and we could just swamp all those servers right away. So he needed that much headroom. And it was only 9 servers. I don't know how much you have now, because I'm not allowed to know that.
Yeah, so we've actually been on a journey where our entire SaaS product, Stack Overflow for Teams, runs on Microsoft Azure. So that is scaling on the cloud, using all the usual technologies. And then we are actually in the process of thinking about, for the public platform, do we also have kind of the usual, let's think about microservices, cloud agnostic, an architecture that ultimately allows us to scale and do things specifically with something like Overflow AI, where we expect a lot more demand on the architecture just in general. So I think it's just going to be different, and it's going to be easier when you leverage native services from some of these cloud providers that have got AI-enabled sort of services, managed services, for us to be able to scale very rapidly and build things and iterate very quickly. So over time, as we incorporate AI, I think there'll be more of a need for us to leverage some of those services in a way that allows us to go faster, effectively. So our CTO, Jody Bailey, he's all about that. He's the expert on that subject, and so I'm sure he'll document that pretty soon. So.
But I think what's interesting about that question is that really wasn't a primary concern of ours. Like, we had great programmers, and so we did a great job with that in the past. But our actual concern was, how do you scale a community from 30,000 users to 30 million users? And how do you scale the interactions that they have with one another so that they really work as things sort of scale up? And stuff you saw over the years, honestly, the initial architecture with tags of the site was very good. And then over time, there were just all these little adjustments and all these little tweaks to the way that you earned reputation and the way that moderation was done that reflected attempts to try to scale the way that people work together on the internet. And that was more of our scaling concern, was honestly like that cultural or anthropological domain.
And there's actually a lot of blog posts about the efficiency of the architecture online. So if you ever want to go check it out, you can. It's on Stack Overflow's blog. So, yeah.
Thank you for that one. And yeah, we have a lot of technical questions. So I will spare the best one for the end. But first, what LLM is behind Overflow AI? People
Okay.
voting for that.
I saw that actually was a question also asked in the main session, which I didn't get to in the talk. So we are testing all sorts of LLMs, but the Overflow AI for our alpha releases are based on Microsoft Azure's OpenAI APIs underneath. And that's what's powering it, because it also comes with some really great sort of guardrails on things like trust and safety, as an example, which they've actually done a really good job of. However, we partner with everybody, so we are testing Google's equivalent, we are testing Amazon's, their open source models like Mozilla, and we've also looked at if we had our own lightweight model, what would that look like? And with our own data around it. And the early results of that have been spectacular. I mean, our team, our process AI team, and our team, our data team, have been testing that very specifically, and it's been fascinating to see how much high quality you can get without a lot of investment. And so that's
I'm just realizing that, like, if we train an LLM on our data alone, that's like ChatGPT minus Reddit.
Right. Exactly. So there's more to come on that, but I think generally speaking, we're doing a bunch of experiments, but everything as it relates to the alpha is around Microsoft Azure's Overflow AI. Yeah. I'm sorry, OpenAI APIs. Sorry.
All right. Then we make a quick change to money.
Ooh.
One question is, will Stack Overflow AI significantly increase the cost of running Stack Overflow? How will you cover that cost?
It's related to the point I just made. So obviously, it has to be viable for anybody to use. That's my earlier point around concerns and so on around generative AI. So that's why we're testing all these things. And so for us, it needs to be worth it. One is, on the public platform, we always will be committed to free and open access for people to try out all our products without any cost and no kind of paywalls and things like that. But for our Stack Overflow for Teams product that's used by 15,000 companies and organizations all around the world's largest banks, Microsoft, you name it, SAP here in Europe.
Who are the biggest ones?
Which companies?
Which are the biggest ones?
Yeah, so Microsoft, all the banks that you can think of, SAP, the big retail companies that you can think of, Bloomberg, you name it. There's a very laundry list of companies and all the high-growth startups. All of them use Stack Overflow for Teams to share and collaborate internally, but they pay a SaaS price for that, much like you pay for Slack or any other SaaS software that you use inside your company. And that's how we will recover the cost of integrating generative AI and pricing all this additional capability on top of what we sell with Stack Overflow for Teams.
All right.
Yeah.
So I have two more questions. The one is really just some seconds in the end. And before, we would like to know, taking into account AI influence, will people still want to contribute to Stack Overflow knowledge base?
Yeah, you want to go first? Go
Sure. Yeah, I think they absolutely will. People contribute to Stack Overflow because they want to help somebody, and because it's fun. It's a challenge and there's an incredible human compulsion to help somebody when you are uniquely capable of helping that particular person. So I think if you used to have a lot of fun helping beginners concatenate strings in JavaScript, you can still have fun doing that. If you're increasingly irritated that they haven't figured out how to look that up on their own or how to figure that or ask ChatGPT to do that for them, then you don't have to do that. On the other hand, if you've written some open source library that has some enormously complicated algorithm at the heart of it that's not well documented, and you find somebody online that's trying to use your code and they cannot quite figure it out, and you actually know the answer to their question, you will want to answer that and get the official canonical answer out there on the internet, and you always will. And so essentially, all I really care about is what's the first time that information goes from being in people's heads to being accessible on the internet. And that's the time where I think people will always want to ask the question because they're not getting the answers, because the information doesn't exist, and they're going to want to answer the questions. And so that's probably, right now, if you look at Stack Overflow, that's only a percentage of the questions that are actually on the homepage at any given time. But I'm kind of OK with that, and I think there's so many new there's so many domains in which there's kind of new knowledge getting created every day. And the Teams example, where you're inside an enterprise, and there's 105,000 developers inside a large company who all have knowledge in their heads that is either not documented anywhere, it's certainly not in ChatGPT, another public knowledge base. And eventually, like, that knowledge has to at least once get out there in some kind of place where somebody can find it and ingest it. And until then, I think the incentive system will continue to exist for Stack Overflow. But if this incentive system goes away for high school students asking homework questions, I'm okay with that. There may be better ways for robots to help those people.
Yeah, my answer to that would be, I think very much there's a real reason for people to engage on Stack, want to learn, help their fellow developer, and ultimately there are incentives in place to be recognized as like some of the world's best, right? Because we have the world's best JavaScript programmers or Google, any sort of technology, they're on Stack. And so there are very few places that you can go to. So you can talk to a bot all day long, but that's not really, okay, that you're in your sort of cocoon, really not really sort of helping other folks. So, and also in the context of the company, a lot of companies will be concerned if people don't really contribute their talents and what they're actually doing to the greater good of the company versus leaving as soon as they're done after a year or two, and then the company basically has to start completely from scratch. I mean, their brain drain is going to be significant if you actually don't share and contribute to a common knowledge base. So for a lot of things, that's why we believe humans and human connection, which is why we so focus on community and all the things that community does, connect the dots, help each other out, all those things,
Cool.
so important.
Well, we're a little bit over time, but I teased the one final question, and just one sentence, and then we're done. So, how we really exit from Vim?
Ooh.
Oh,
Very high voted.
That's all you. Go.
colon Q exclamation point.
But one word or one sentence maximum we
Okay,
have to finish.
Ditto to what Joel said.
We will not.
Yeah, reboot. Reboot. Why do you uninstall Vim?
Well, lovely.
Thank
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.